A quick favor before we start, if you love the Blueprint podcast, please rate and review us wherever you listen. It makes a huge difference. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Blueprint podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Dr. Will Samson. Dr. Samson is a transformational mindset coach, TEDx speaker, and founder of the T3 ecosystem. His TEDx talk, A Revolution of Interdependence, reframes resilience through connection and community, hosts the Mission Driven You podcast, and leads retreats that help people rebuild from the inside out. Will's message is simple. Real change isn't about pushing harder. It's about becoming more grounded, resilient, and interdependent. Dr. Will Samson, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you. Your TED Talk speaks on interdependence, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit here, but it was one of the things that attracted me to your content and everything that you're doing, because I believe that it is so important, and especially in today's world, especially with the past week of events that we've experienced. I think we're going to need to lean into that a little bit more. So tell everybody who you are and who you help.
You bet. My name is Will Samson, as you've already mentioned, and I get to spend my days helping executives and C-suite level individuals deal with resilience, lean into interdependence. I also do some private coaching with individuals who are really looking to up their game in terms of performance and self-optimization. And most of that just comes out of my own journey. Another really important thing that I tell people, which if folks watch my TED Talk, is the theme of my talk, which is I'm a person in long-term recovery. And I didn't come into recovery till later in life. I was in my 50s already when I came into recovery. And so things like interdependence, vulnerability, resilience, these were skills that I had to learn often later than most people do. So a lot of my heart beats for folks who think that they're stuck. And this isn't necessarily the down and outers. I'm not talking about people begging for change on the corner of the street. I work with some executives who are at the top of their business game, but their personal lives are falling apart or they're stuck in addiction of some kind. And so really my heart goes out for people who feel like some part of their life and journey was not fixable. And those are the people that I really love to work with.
And of course, a big part of this is our own story. When we look back on our own experiences, we end up becoming the person that we needed to be in today's age to help the person that we once were. And I think that's really what helps make you so successful. So tell us what experiences shaped your perspective on transformation and resilience and what brought you to helping people in the way that you do.
Yeah, and often in recovery, we frame our stories around what it was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And for me, I was one of those executives at the top of my game. I was in change management, which is the area where I do a lot of consulting. I was about as high as I could get. I was in the CIO's office at a huge defense contractor, helping manage change for more than 50,000 employees. And yet my internal life was torn apart and I was miserable. And I had spent more than a decade at that point really self-medicating because I couldn't find content within myself. And so really the big lie of addiction is not that we need this thing or that thing. It's that we need anything to come into us in order for us to feel healthy, whole, happy. And I had a life-changing event. I talk about it in the TEDx talk, but in June of 2019, I was driving a vehicle, had too much to drink, caused a 4-car pileup, and drove away. I don't say that in any kind of bragging way because it's nothing I should feel proud about. But that set in motion a series of events that led to my recovery. First of all, I had to spend 5 weeks in jail. So I'm in jail in the beginning of 2020. And I'm hearing about all this crazy virus that's happening. At that point, I was unemployed. So I got out and I said, what would make sense right now would be to start my own business. So I launched my own business in February of 2020. And of course, a month later, the whole world shut down because of COVID. So at that point, the question was really, okay, here's what you got. What are you going to do with it? And this is really the heart of what I do. I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And one of the key elements of that book is that the only thing that we're actually in control of is our attitude in any given situation. And so at that point, it was really a perfect testing ground to say, okay, what is your attitude now? How can you shape your perspective on the events in the world and in your own life in a way that is positive for you and for the people around you that you love and for the world, for the future? How can you become a better ancestor? So that process of starting a business in the middle of COVID, finding recovery, healing a lot of my personal relationships during that time, that's really the heart. That was my training ground. I have plenty of academic expertise. If you're watching this on video, you can see that I've got a whole bunch of books behind me, and there's another 4 or 5 bookshelves in my house. But there's so much more than that academic knowledge. It's really that core, that heart knowledge that we learn from deep experience. And that's what I bring to individuals now.
It's so difficult when we have these traumatic experiences that bring us to this place of a rock bottom. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know if that was your rock bottom, if you had something previous to that. Oftentimes we find ourselves in those places where we end up doing something out of character. It's not very fitting of who we believe ourselves to be. And we don't recognize some of the things that are running in the background of our own lives. And one of the things that 2020 really allowed many of us to do was to get a peek behind the curtain of what was actually going on internally with ourselves, with our families, with our career paths, the things that we're doing in our life. We start asking ourselves the deeper meaning. What is the meaning of all of this? And you ask the questions, who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And for many other people, it was they zoned out in the experience, and maybe they didn't have that type of awareness. But when we look at these events that shape and form us, what was it for you that just gave you, number one, the awareness, right? You have to have the recognition, but also there's another part of this where you start to lean into your own personal power, or maybe the power of your own personal faith. And I'm just curious what that looked like for you.
Yeah, and it is a paradox because transformation happens in our life when we take agency, when we take control. But oftentimes there are a variety of reasons, the stories we tell ourselves, trauma experiences, and so on, why when we don't really feel like we have that agency. So I think everybody needs a recovery meeting of some kind. Because what I learned in that process, there was a group of people who said, we're going to love you until you can love yourself. We're going to believe in you until you can believe in yourself. And what that did was it really rekindled in me a sense of self-compassion, a sense of self-agency, and a sense of belief. Oh, there's these people around me who have struggled with similar things. They don't match my experience, but they certainly rhyme. You hear that a lot in the rooms of recovery. And so what I realized is that there was people whose experiences rhymed with mine, and they had used that experience to really transform themselves and to find a different way of living in the world. And in some ways, like being able to recognize that I was not in this alone. So it's that catch-22. It's a paradox where transformation happens when we own the work. But part of that, for many of us, it was certainly true for me, transformation becomes more likely when we recognize that there's other people who have been through this. Those people are willing to love us and believe in us, even when we can't. And from that, we find the strength to shape the life we want.
It's one of those things, your past isn't your future. And I love that you said that you wanted to become a better ancestor. I think that's such an important framework when we look at our internal narrative and we think about who we are, who we've been, and to be able to zoom out, become the observer, give yourself the time and the opportunity to look at yourself as though you're looking in a mirror, and actually use the language that you have today, the knowledge, the experience, the earned wisdom that you have today, to look back on those experiences and apply a different framework, a different way of thinking about those experiences. It actually allows you to take your power back away from those past experiences. So you're no longer living in the past. You're actually giving yourself the emotional freedom to say, okay, I don't need those experiences anymore. They were traumatic. They were difficult. It was painful. I didn't like it. I don't want to go through it. I certainly wouldn't suggest it for anybody else. But what so many people find themselves in is trapped in that past experience, that past narrative. So how would you help people navigate beyond that narrative?
Yeah. And sometimes it's really as simple as just becoming aware. So Carl Jung said, whatever we don't bring into consciousness appears to us as fate. And I find not only working with people in addiction, but working with executives as well, oftentimes there's a certain fatedness to it. This is just how things are. This is just how things go. But the reality is we live in a world that we create. And some of it can be as simple as observing. One simple exercise I often do with clients is I have them keep a pad of paper and a pen by whatever their writing hand is, their left or right hand. And every time they're observing a story, so we, throughout the day, we're narrating our life with these stories we tell ourselves. Every time they're observing a story, I have them write that down on the left side of the page. And then on the right side of the page, whether it's then or if they do it at the end of the day, to go back and match that to the reality of our situation, to really begin to create a distance between ourselves and our stories. And this is well-worn knowledge, but the way our mind works is we make decisions in our prefrontal cortex, but we're always narrating things in our amygdala. And most of our day is spent in unconscious actions. Like we're not actually planning to do the things we do. And so the more we can become aware of it, the more we can become aware of those actions and the way those stories are shaping our actions. I think the more we can begin to take control. I will say another really important thing, this is something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about lately, is I've begun to redefine my sense of purpose. I used to buy into the idea that my life had some grand narrative and I had to meet that narrative. That was the thing. I had to do that thing. And so if that didn't happen, then I'm certainly disappointed. Then I can tell myself negative stories. But what I've come to believe is my purpose is to act with integrity and to do the next thing well, whatever is in front of me. Like we so often think we've got to know, and this is not different from even the way I coach clients. I often coach clients to have a 3-year vision on what they want to see in their life. And so I think that future self can be important. But the greatest challenge for us, especially in a culture that is constantly trying to leech our attention, the greatest action for us is to do the next right thing and to do the next thing, to act with integrity in the moment. And Aristotle said it, our life is a series of actions with integrity. When you put them together, you have a life of integrity.
Hey, Blueprint listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to truly unlock your own personal transformation, I invite you to explore the Self-Discovery Blueprint. This is where we dive deep into the strategies and insights you need to understand who you are, clarify your purpose, and build the life you're truly meant for. It's the comprehensive guide to your next level growth. You can find out more by visiting my Stand store, link in bio, or in the show notes. Yeah, you hear a lot of people that are successful speak about intentions and integrity, and it's that integrity with yourself. So we can talk about the future and you can look at the future and say, I want to do all of these amazing things. And then we might create a vision board. We put pictures up on there. Maybe you'll sit down and do some future journaling. What do I feel like 10 years from now? What's going on inside of my body? Do I have $1 million? And you give yourself that experience. And there's certainly some validity to doing those things so that your mind gets focused, right? That reticular activating system, you start looking for these things in your present environment. But for a lot of people, they can say, that's just too far away from me. I can't get there. But they have that same mindset that you don't look like the things that you've been through. So you've been challenged. You've gone through all this stuff. You have all these difficult experiences. You overcome it. You become an overcomer. And then you start sharing your experiences with other people so that you can help lift them up as well. And often what I find, especially on social media, and it was something that was very unexpected, is the more distance that people have from their version of you that they have in their head, as you continue to grow, expand, develop, and evolve, they will sit there and say, you don't look like what you've been through. And now I resent you. Now I dislike you. Now I don't want to spend time with you because now you've changed. And so we see this with the people in our lives as well. And I'm curious about your experience. Did you experience that with the people in your life as you continue to grow, to change, evolve, and become renewed?
Absolutely. So this is where really owning ourselves, our outcomes, our agency to the exclusion of what other people may do. I have a friend, and occasionally he and I'll get on Zoom or on some kind of remote interface, and he'll often put his hands out and he'll point to the edges of his fingers, and he says, "That edge of your finger, that's the edge of your control." And so often we wish, and a lot of our mental illness and other kinds of things that we often struggle with is the belief that someone else should behave a certain way, that I need someone else to behave a certain way in order for me to be a thing, to feel something. And that's its own form of addiction. Like alcohol, cocaine, those are things that some of us ingested because we thought if I take that in, that will help clear my cluttered mind, or it'll calm me down, or it will cause some feeling in me. And the same is true when we expect other people to behave in certain ways. Now, that's not to say that some of those separations weren't hard. That's not to say that there aren't some challenges, relational challenges in my life. Even 6 years into sobriety, there's still some things I struggle with.
You mean you don't think, act, and feel exactly the same way that I do?
So imagine
That's
that.
so strange.
Surprising. Yeah. But that is one of the maladies of our day, is that we tend to think that everybody else behaves the way we think. And that is just misguided on so many levels. But I think it's also the other reason why it is a problem for our time is that we have outsourced our emotions to others. One of the reasons why social media is so addictive is because it strikes at our dopamine systems. And so we see somebody else doing something and immediately we feel either pride or more often, unfortunately, envy. Oh, that person grew an audience to $100,000 or 100,000 followers in 3 months. Why can't I do that? Or they don't deserve that, or something like that, as if that other person's life was ours. And the reality that we each have our own life, we have our own path. And the more we can own that, the better we'll be. Now, I want to touch though, because oftentimes that can feel like a kind of narcissism, or it can feel like, oh, you're only worried about yourself. And there's a huge difference. As for my TEDx talk, I focus a lot on interdependence. How do we build mutual systems of dependence? But the way we do that is by fully owning ourselves and our own journey. And then when we can come from a place of wholeness, we can bring other people into our lives, into our projects, whatever it is we're trying to create in the world, because we do it from a place of health, not from a place of need.
So what's interesting about that is people who that have more feelings of anxiousness, they will look at people that are confident, capable, they're good at what they do. They seem to be successful in a lot of things that they're doing. And they'll label that as narcissism, especially when they look at their different partners and stuff like that from relationship standpoint. They take care of themselves and they go to the gym and they do all of these things and they don't include me in that exactly. And it's they asked you to go. Did you go? No. They're so narcissistic. Right. And it's like, yeah, and that's more self-preservation. I talk about this a lot from the aspect of you have to know and trust yourself. And when you know and trust yourself, you become more capable, competent, and confident in who you are as a person. And when that happens, you start showing up differently in the world. And when you start showing up differently, everything around you starts to change. Now, it might not change in the way that you want it to, right? There's going to be people that you love, that you care about, and they're going to start to reject you a little bit because this new version of you doesn't compute with the version that's in the back of their mind that they've cultivated over the past decade, right? They know this is who I know you to be, and now you're being different, and I don't like that. So there's a rejection that comes with it. And that's why you have to know and trust yourself and have your mindset oriented in the direction that you actually want to be going and working towards those things, and recognize that you don't have to take everything personally that people give to you, but you should take it in, take a look at it, ask yourself, is this useful? And is it true or untrue? Is this something that maybe I do need to change? Maybe I do need to think about the way that I show up in the world and the things that I do. And other times what you'll notice is it's just the way the other person feels about themselves. And so they're projecting that onto you, a little bit of their own insecurity. And with that, we have a little bit of pity, but we also have understanding. And I recognize that I can still love you even though that's your experience of me, I disagree with it, but I still love you. I care about you. I want to see you be happy, healthy, wealthy, and well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so much of it comes down to this, how we think about the goodness of ourselves, others, and the universe. And this is one question that I will often have coaching clients ask is when they're dealing with a difficult situation, I often have them ask, what would this situation look like if, number one, I believed I was fundamentally good? Number two, I believed the people around me, while broken, were trying to do their best in the world. And number three, I believe the universe was aligned for my goodness. So whatever you think the universe and consciousness is, whether you have a concept of a God or just well-being or whatever, if when you believe all of those things are aligned for your goodness, then that difficult situation, and oftentimes even somebody falling away or a relationship not being as important in the future as it was in the past, is a decision of others. Like we have too much victimization in our culture, I believe, and oftentimes we believe people are doing things to us. I'll give you a specific example. I dealt with this with a dear friend who was achieving a certain amount of success in an area that I had really wanted, in which I had wanted to be successful. And I went through a couple of weeks after his book came out. I went through a couple of weeks of having to realize, no, they didn't write this book at me. Like they didn't go to a national publish, like all these stories that I was telling myself. And this was a couple of years ago, thankfully, but all these stories I was telling myself were just narratives I was
Yeah.
creating.
How dare you steal that success from me?
Yeah, or how dare you get a national publisher to publish your work? Like it's so absurd. And what I had to realize is, no, that's a story I'm telling myself to make sense of an area where I have not achieved the success I desire, but that person wasn't acting in any way. In fact, most of what they did they never had me in mind while doing that. And I think really moving out of that victimization culture and moving into the sense of goodness, which is going back to Viktor Frankl, that's an attitude we can choose. We can choose to believe we're good, the people around us, while flawed, are good, and the universe is aligned for our goodness. That's an attitude we can choose to inhabit.
It's also an attitude of anti-fragility. So being hardened in the difficult times, not in a way that you become stone within your heart, right? But that you are shaped, you are forged, you are honed, you are sharpened through the difficult times. It's equanimity. It's the calmness in the face of adversity, and taking that on as principles in your life that you're going to stand by, that you recognize that I don't have to play victim in an experience just because something didn't work out right now. Doesn't mean that it's not going to work out in the future. And these difficult experiences that I'm having are actually making me better in the long term.
Precisely. Yeah. And I think I think that anti-fragility is going to be the critical skill moving forward, because I believe we are entering into an historical time when we're going to see a lot of stuff, a lot of systems that we've come to rely on are going to start to break. I don't say that ominously, or I certainly don't desire that, but I think anti-fragility will become, or we could also call it resilience, that will become top two or three necessary skills for surviving the world that is, we're going to see over the next probably decade at least.
Beyond resilience. And some people sit there and say, that's very narcissistic, isn't it? No, again, it falls back to self-preservation. And then you have to know and trust yourself. And I don't need to repeat the other phrases, but that's really what it comes down to. But we also have to take into consideration interdependence, which is a big piece of your work. So I was hoping you could explain to us what that is, how to develop it, and what are some exercises that people can do to push it forward in their own lives.
You bet. So I often encourage people to go back and read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Agreed.
What too many don't remember was that literally half of the habits were habits of interdependence. And so in Covey's model was develop your internal state, do the work necessary to be anti-fragile. And then when you can do that, then you're able to lean into interdependence. And the classic definition of interdependence is mutual dependence. And so often we've heard horror stories of codependence, and that is something that we should be very afraid of. But I also think in our culture, we've been told too many stories of a false kind of independence that's not accurate. And the best example I can think of is Steve Jobs. So Jobs was struggling. He was a genius, no doubt, but really struggling to put out product. And he met this doctoral student, or this former CEO, doctorate in engineering, named Tim Cook. And Tim Cook said, okay, here's how we can begin to produce. Tim Cook is an operational genius. He was able to get product out the door. Johnny Ive came along and said, yes, you're interested in beauty. Here's how we can make beautiful product that ship out the door. And so even the classic example of what we think of as an independent, self-made human, Steve Jobs, we might not really even remember him much, but for the other people that came into his life. And that's a great example of interdependence. It's the idea that everything great is the creation of people working together. Some of it comes down to understanding who you are. And what I often do, one of the exercises I give my clients is, we call it red, yellow, green light. And I have them tell the stories of their week. And often, if we can, we observe it over several weeks. And then go back historically and say, okay, when I was feeling a lot of energy and enthusiasm, what was I doing? We call those green lights. When I struggle to get through something, when I don't have a lot of energy, when it feels like a trudge, when I feel like I'm Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, what am I doing? Those are red lights. And of course, yellow lights fall in between. And if we trust the goodness of the universe, we trust, for example, that there are people who love doing things that are red lights for us. And we also trust that there are some of the things you do as a podcast host, I do as a speaker, getting out in front of people. Some people dread that would be a complete red light for them. And so we recognize that the universe is made up of diverse people, diverse skills, diverse energies. And when we trust the goodness of that, then we can come to form ideas and projects that rely on the best of a group of people to create that outcome that we want. And one good example of this is a tool that I use that was actually developed out of Purdue. It's called strategic doing. And it's a way of bringing a group of community activists into a room and really seeing, what does everybody bring to the table, and what's one outcome that we could bring out of that group? And that's trusting in the goodness of that community, the people who showed up. But it's also rooted in the belief that everything great is something we create together. There simply are no examples of self-made women, self-made men. The best of us have relied on others to create that. And yeah, in terms of exercises, probably the most straightforward one is the red, yellow, green. Go through and really analyze, what am I doing when I have a tremendous amount of energy? What takes energy away from me, and how can I begin to bring people into my life, to my business, to my projects, who find green light energy in things that draw energy out of me. And together we can be interdependent and create something of beauty in the world.
Yeah, I can share with you, one of the red lights for me is public speaking. And I think people would look at that and be like, what? You're a podcast host. How is that even possible? Yeah. It's a big difference when you're in your at-home studio, otherwise known as your basement, and you're having conversations with people one-on-one through a camera versus obviously getting out in public, even though I've shared plenty of ideas in the public sphere on social media. And of course, those get tested out in the real world. The other part of interdependence that I want to focus on is our relationships with other people. We look at it, you hear it a lot from the aspect of romantic relationships. And so from my perspective, it's simply your partner goes out in the world, you go out in the world, you don't do anything nefarious to hurt one another. You come back together knowing full well that's the mission and vision that you have for your relationship. And I think that's really the most important part, is that you do have a shared mission and vision for your relationship. And then ultimately you also adopt a 1, 3, 5, and 10-year plan. And then you're doing a check-in as a couple on this plan throughout time. And of course, you have to lead the relationship in a way that's going to happen so that you do stay on track with your vision for what you're actually creating for your lives together. And what we see with a lot of people is they just meander throughout time together, right? They come together. It's a matter of proximity. I'm not even sure I love you. But now we have children, and now we're working our jobs, and we're not really in this to win it. And then it's 10 years later, 20 years later, and you're just completely distant from one another because you didn't actually create your life together. You just let it happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, completely agree. And I think there are some skills related to interdependence, and we can talk about them. I certainly talk
Yeah,
about
let's
those
do
in
it.
the TED Talk. But before we do that, though, I do want to talk about the importance of desire. And this is something that I've been writing about more recently. And if I put out the book I keep threatening to put out, it'll be in there. So often we use the word need. I need to do this. And a lot of times when I'm working with clients early on, they're like, oh, I need to spend more time in the office, or I need to spend more time with this team. And the reality is that we live in a world, if you're listening to this, you probably don't have a whole lot of actual needs. Most of what you have is wants, they're desires, and that's beautiful. And we should bless that and say, yes, please understand what your desires are, because when we are clear with what we want in the world, then we can act with intention and integrity, as we mentioned earlier. It's like when I have a real sense of desire, I know this is what I would love to see, what I'd love to be working on. Then we can bring intention and integrity to it. And then that's where interdependence becomes a matter of learning the skills necessary. So if you want to go through some of the skills of interdependence? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And
that's great.
I talk about this in my TEDx talk. One of them is accountability, and really being able to understand and recognize our relationship to others, to own everything that's ours. But a really important thing is own what isn't ours. Another key skill is vulnerability and being able to be vulnerable. This is, again, a great gift of anybody who's been through recovery in any 12-step program, whether it's for alcohol, narcotics, sex and love addiction, whatever that is. You learn this real sense of vulnerability. You go into a room of strangers and you're willing to be vulnerable with them because there's a trust in the room. But so often, especially when I'm talking to CEOs, but really anybody who's gotten to the C level of an organization, vulnerability just doesn't seem like a safe gamble to them. At that point, they feel very afraid. They want to protect whatever it is they've built. And so vulnerability doesn't necessarily feel safe, even though we know some of the really great companies over the years have understood how to create that. And then another key skill is authenticity. Like, how can I actually be myself? How can I show up as my full self in the world? And so much of that comes back to the stories we tell ourselves, and oftentimes rewriting, whether it's rewriting the internal operating system, rewriting the narratives we tell ourselves, whatever that is. When I work with people in addiction, we often talk about the old movie trope, caller is inside the house. Like you hear the caller calls and says, or the bad guy calls, I'm going to get you, whatever. And then we realize, I'm not sure that anybody has landlines anymore, but we realized the caller was on another line in the house or on a cell phone in the house, whatever. I think in the same way, like really being able to recognize, where do those stories come from? And just because we told ourselves something doesn't mean it's true, and really beginning to rewrite those narratives and rewrite the code that can build resilience within us.
Yeah. It's interesting to me as we're sitting here talking, you mentioned vulnerability. And I know that's one of those words that, people have taken to because of Brene Brown. But when we look at the actual definition, it's a weakness in your defenses. And then we apply it from a psychology perspective that you're opening yourself up to injury from whoever is in your life. And that it can be so many different experiences. And I think what a lot of people are looking for, especially when we're looking at anti-fragility and resilience, is what they're really looking for is intimacy. I want intimacy with this person. I want intellectual honesty with this person. And neither of those two things are mentioned in the definition of vulnerability. So I think it's really important to break it down just a little bit further as to what people actually want, because they misunderstand. They think vulnerability is, I'm going to give you everything that I've ever done in my life. I'm going to put that on you. You're going to carry this with you as I've carried it with me, and you asked for it. So now you're going to get all of it. And you can do that, but guess what's going to happen? The other person's going to reject you because they were never meant to carry what is inside of you.
Yeah. And oftentimes the things that are vulnerable in our psyche are actually not a direct reflection on what we do, but they have a huge impact on what we do. I'll give you an example. And I think I can anonymize this example. So I was working with the leadership team of a national corporation. And in the pre-interviews, one thing that I kept hearing was this person, and it happened to be the person in charge of the finances, they're just a real hard ass. You don't want to go to ask this person for money. You don't want to even, they're just tough to get along with. And one of the things that's really obvious, if you think about it, if you're afraid to go to the financial person to ask for money, then, that brings about a significant dysfunction in the team. It was a 2-day offsite. And at the beginning of the second day, I led them through a series of questions. And the questions are, I come from a people who, I come from a place where, and I bring with me. And this particular individual talked about growing up as a person of color in the American Southeast in the 50s, being picked up on a bus and taken to a school that was not in their neighborhood. And the more we talked about it, the more it became obvious, oh, okay, this person doesn't hate me or want to deny me the financial inputs that I need for my department. They're dealing with other things that are at a different level. And that's a very personal example. But what it goes to show is that oftentimes the things that are in our way are not the apparent job related things. They're those deeper narratives that are existing inside of us. And the more we can be honest, not necessarily share, as you pointed out, not necessarily share every injury that we've ever experienced, but the more we can be honest about what's motivating our behavior, what's getting in the way of rational decisions, and oftentimes what we're good at. By the time somebody gets to the C-level in an organization, we often expect they're good at everything. And I've never met anyone who is good at everything. Most of us have things that we're very good at. There's things we are okay at, and then there's things we rely on other people to do. And being able to be vulnerable about them, especially in executive and management roles, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously we want to be honest with ourselves. And that means you got to look in the mirror, you got to look at your narrative and really break that down as to what these things mean to you, because it really does become what prevents you from being able to do the things that you want to do. There's so many examples out in the world. Now we have millions of examples throughout time of people that came from very difficult backgrounds. They did amazing things. There was no reason for them to ever have been as successful as they actually were when you look at the background and where they came from and what they were able to do. And we see all of these examples, especially today in 2025. And what separates them is they believed that they could, so they did. And they didn't listen to the ways of the world. They didn't listen to what other people were saying. They just stopped allowing that to limit them, to become the barrier to the things that they knew. If I let this go, I can get to the other side of where I actually want to be. And they did it. So then you have to ask yourself, what's stopping me today? It's a very valid question.
Yeah. And there's always what's stopping me today. There's always a variety of answers to that question. But one thing that's on virtually every list, I would guarantee you, what's stopping me today is some cultural narrative that I am forcing myself to live by. I can't do this because of X. I experienced this in my own life. Look, go do a Google search on people who started over later in life, and you'll find Ray Kroc, Colonel Sanders, and then a bunch of 40-year-olds. And in my own experience, like I was 55. It's like, is it over? Have I blown my chance?
And it almost seems like life begins at 40 when you look at it that way.
You would think so. Yeah, you would think so. And even again, when you see these, don't be discouraged, because here's the entrepreneurs who started over and later in life. It's usually like Vera Wang and Martha Stewart, people who are in their 30s and 40s. And kudos to them. They've done great things. I'm a huge fan of Martha Stewart. Finding an inspiration of someone who started over in their 50s, frankly, there weren't a lot of them. And so what I needed to do was write my own narrative and my own set of self-beliefs. It's never too late. Like, as long as my heart is beating, then I can create goodness in the world. It's never too late. And so often what is keeping people from achieving what they want in life is some story somebody else created for their own end, and not our own story, our own our own narrative or even our own limitations. Because as you pointed out, like there's so many examples of people who have overcome really significant disadvantages and been very successful in life. And so much of it comes down to, am I willing to believe my story against the cultural narrative? And am I willing to bring other people into this journey? And I think that's the balancing. That's where interdependence becomes a really helpful balance, because where interdependence can come in is providing a certain sounding board. I think we have to be careful listening to too many others in terms of validating our own goals and desires. But once we have a clear vision of them, then how do we find other people to participate in that dream?
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of people, and myself included at different time periods in my life, you look to other people to validate your experience. And as I've gotten older, as I'm approaching 50, I care a little bit less about what other people think, not from the standpoint of, I love having dialogue. I love having these conversations. That's why I have a podcast. I want to bring people on with diverse background and thought and have all of these different types of conversations, make it fun, make it enlightening. But at the end of the day, you don't impact the way that I feel about myself.
Yeah.
That stopped. And I'm not looking or searching for people. Hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of that? Should I do this? And the people that I am asking those questions of, it's for very specific reasons of things that I'm doing, whether it's from operating a business or how I'm showing up, or maybe even getting my own TEDx talk down the road. So I'm asking very different questions, not these personal questions about who am I, where am I going, what am I doing? I've already answered all of those questions for myself. And you recognize that whatever you're looking for out in the world, most of it's already inside of you. And so you have to learn to validate your own experience and be good with the answer.
Absolutely. And yeah, I often apply a twofold test, which is it true to me and is it good for others?
Yeah.
And if you were to look at a lot of the great struggles in our world today, especially, I don't want to dive into politics, but we are deep in a contentious time in our nation's history, in American history. And so often it's people who are either trying to live by somebody else's dream, which doesn't meet the "is it true for me" test, or they are seeking to live in a way that is not good for others. And this is true across the spectrum. This is not a partisan critique. I think across the spectrum, we have people who are saying, my way should be the dominant way. And that's not good for others. That's not the way you create a future. I can't imagine creating a company, creating a community. I spent 7 years living in an intentional community when I was in my late 30s and early 40s. And you just simply couldn't have had a community that was driven by what's the best for me, the rest of you be damned. You really got to ask, like, is it true for me and is it good for others? And I think when we can live in the tension between those two, then going back to the phrase I used earlier, I think we can start to become better ancestors. We can begin to imagine, oh, the world I'm creating today will impact my children, my grandchildren, and so on.
So what's interesting, I love that you brought all this up, because I talk about this a lot. When you want change always starts with you. It starts with the one. It starts with the individual. And what everybody has done, not everybody, give me a break, guys. But what people are doing is, again, they're looking for that external validation. And they're also looking I have to change everything around me to fit my worldview, to fit my expectations of how things should be. Or I can't be around you. I can't spend time with you. I can't interact with you. I can't have dialogue with you. I don't want to, we believe completely different things. Therefore, I have to shun you from existence because it just doesn't fit with my expectation of how the world should be. And when you do that, you're giving your personal power away to everything that is outside of you. So you're going to feel lost. You're going to feel frustrated. You're going to be irritated, sad, lonely, depressed, angry, resentful, and filled with contempt, because you recognize just how little power you have to change the world. Now, where you can change the world, and this is where they're like, oh, that's really difficult. Yeah, it is. But like I said, it starts by the one. So if you want change, you have to change. What does that look like? It means focusing on yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah.
Dropping something in each of those buckets each and every day. And in the beginning, it's going to be really tough because you're not going to, what am I supposed to put in there? What am I supposed to put in there? You might not have the energy or the resources to do that. But over time, it has a compounding effect where you drop all these things in the buckets and then it just becomes the habit of being you. So now you're no longer thinking about putting things in those buckets. It's just who you are as a person. You stretch your capacity for discomfort and uncertainty, and you become more resilient. You become anti-fragile, and you become a person who is capable, competent, and confident with who they are as a person. And so that is powerful. That is how you change the world, because it has an impact on everybody around you in your sphere of influence.
Absolutely. And I'm not particularly religious anymore, but let me just say amen. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with everything. Couldn't agree stronger with everything you just said. And some of it too is about developing an identity that is consistent with that. Because we tend to process out of three sectors: our head, our heart, and our gut. Our head is where we make conscious decisions about things we want to change. Our gut is where we psychically take the action to do that. But in between our head and our gut is our heart. And that's where we form identity. And there's tons of research, and there's more research coming out every year, that when we shape our identity in line with what we would like to be in the world, then it's easier to take those actions. Classic example, I think it was something obscure, like the Journal of Physical Science, I believe. They looked at people who self-identified as athletes. And some of them were 20-something-year-olds athletes in college. Some of them were 60-year-old mall walkers. But when people describe themselves as an athlete, then guess what? They did athletic things. They walked, they exercised, they stretched, they did all the things that athletes do. And so I think really deciding, this goes back to desire. What do we desire to be what do we desire to be ourselves? And when we have a clear understanding of that and a clear picture of that, then we begin to take action consistent with that.
Yeah. And a good exercise for this is to grab a sheet of paper, number it 1 through 50, and then look at all the different people that you admire. What are the traits that they have? What are the values that they stand for? What are the standards that they have in their life? And then write all of those things down and give yourself the time and opportunity to actually reflect on the things that you're writing down. And then how can you apply that in your own life? And I get it, guys. Like, there's not a lot of time. Everything is heavy. Everything is difficult right now. This is a 5-minute, 10-minute exercise that you can come back to regularly and use it as something to build yourself up, again, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, as you begin to deploy these things in real time. And if you can't deploy it in real time, then it's time to take action by self-educating through reading books, listening to podcasts. And again, find the people that you admire and then consume that information instead of maybe some of the other stuff that you're consuming that's a little more negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And recognize that everything we consume, just like a substance, all the pieces of data we allow to come into our brain, they shape us. And we shouldn't be eating Big Macs at McDonald's. Don't eat the information equivalent of the Big Mac on the internet.
Yeah. It's also that constant contact with the blue screen, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And this is another thing that's been game changing for me, especially living here in the mountains as I do, is being able to just get out, take a walk.
Yeah. All my videos, right? Take a walk with me. It's a thing, guys. Get outside, get some sunshine. You're going to feel a little bit better. Now, in your coaching, what's the most important mindset shift that you help people make?
Yeah, self-ownership. And we've touched a lot on it, but that is the thing that is most critical, is this idea of self-ownership, because we live in a blame culture. We live in a victim-oriented culture, and we see this happening at every level of our discourse. And so really understanding that you are in charge of you. This is something I learned from my recovery journey, but it's true across the spectrum, is really, how do I own me and everything about me, with the recognition that I don't control everything. There are decisions made outside of my scope that affect me. Interest rates may be lowered and then it'll be harder to borrow and so on. So there are things that happen in the world that I'm not in control of, but recognizing that most of what actually impacts the way I feel about myself is owning it, is really self-ownership of the attitudes, ownership of the actions, as we've discussed already. But then even ownership of the people that I have around me. What's my network? Who are the 5 to 7 people around me? We do with my clients, I often do a who are your 3 to 5 people exercise. Who would you call if you got arrested in the middle of the night? Who would you call if you were broken down on the side of the road? Who would you call if your partner left you? And really understanding that that's not so much a false dependence as it is really owning, who do I bring into my life? Who do I allow to that level of intimacy in my life? Because that's also a critical piece of self-ownership. It's a key input. One of our strongest inputs is our partners, friends, and the people that we have as trusted advisors around us. So yeah, I would say, like, in terms of coaching, number one thing that we do is really work on this idea of self-ownership of our narratives, ownership of our actions, and ownership even of our disciplines. You were talking about just take 5 to 10 minutes. As simple as taking 5 to 10 minutes of concentrated breath in the morning, huge, significant impact on how we feel physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, recognizing that even our emotions are something we create. And Lisa Feldman's Barrett's great book on emotions talks about that. And so really, when we can begin to say everything that I'm experiencing today is something that I choose to experience, even when something happens unexpectedly, I'm still choosing how I behave in relation to that. So yeah, number one skill, without a doubt, self-ownership.
I love that. I also think it's important to name what it is that you're experiencing. I think for a lot of people, it's called shame. And so shame, guilt, that anger that you're feeling is probably connected to fear. And so these are things that, again, we want to be honest with ourselves about what we're experiencing, what that means to us. But in that meaning is also important, because when you take the time and opportunity, once again, to go back and review some of the things that you've experienced, you give it a new meaning, and then you begin to take shape as a more mature person, as an adult. Because I hear this a lot from so many people. I'm over 30 years old. I'm 30, 40, 50, but I still feel like I'm 18. Right. And so there's this emotional immaturity that's associated with where they're at currently. And when you acknowledge this stuff and you get back into it, I had an interview with Annalie Howling, and when she talks about shame, she says the self-compassion is the antidote to that.
Completely agree.
How can we develop that self-compassion?
I can tell you how I did it, which is a big part of my healing was not only through the recovery process, but I've done a lot of work with internal family systems therapy and really recognizing that we are multi-part individuals. When Richard Schwartz first put forward the idea of internal family systems therapy 20, 30 years ago, it seemed crazy to think that there are multiple people inside of us or multiple parts. But for me, recognizing that there were things done that may have caused me trauma, that may have caused me a certain amount of shame. And then I responded in a way, and over years and decades, I built up a series of responses to that weren't always helpful. There's zero value in being critical of the responses now, but there is incredible value, and this gets back to the idea of self-compassion, to recognize that part of us. Maybe it's a 7-year-old part that had a certain amount of wounding and we feel some shame about it. Or like for me, I'll personalize it, which is I grew up with undiagnosed learning disabilities. And notwithstanding a very high IQ, I was pretty convinced that I was just the dumb kid who couldn't get the instructions. And learning over time, there we go, learning over time to have compassion and love for that kid, that part. And now say, okay, now recognize though that I'm a grown ass man. Like I've moved beyond that. How can we work together to create something of value in the world? And I think that's where that self-compassion can motivate us to move beyond the shame, because shame is just a story. I had a friend in college who loved to street, crazy kid. And he didn't think twice of running through the streets of Chattanooga, Tennessee, buck naked. I would have felt devastated by it. So but that's how shame works. So shame is just a story we tell ourselves about something that happened to us and about something that is happening to us. And the more we can re-narrate that story and get back to that fundamental goodness I was talking about, and recognize that we were made in the image of God. We were made to be pure creators. And when we can remove the narratives and even remove the actions, sometimes which were terrible, things that were done to us, when we can remove the stories about those actions and really get back to the heart of our self. In IFS, or internal family systems therapy, the whole goal is to get back to the capital S self, to move from a place of deep agency and self-ownership. When we can get all the other parts out of the way, that includes shame, it includes perfectionism, which is another big thing that I deal with. Like, it's got to be perfect. When we can begin to re-narrate those stories, though, we can get to that core of who we are, and then that's where we get to create from.
Dr. Will Samson, I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing your wisdom with us. Tell everybody where they can reach you and how they can work with you.
You bet. So you can find me on LinkedIn, but probably the best place is to head to my website, which is Will Samson, and there is no P in Samson. It's willsamson.com. You can also find me on Substack at drwillsamson.substack.com, and I look forward to engaging with you.
And you also have a podcast?
I also have a podcast called Mission Driven You. Yep. And occasionally I pop up on YouTube as well.
So make sure you guys check that out. And of course, all this stuff will be in the show notes, guys. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you again next time.